Do you remember those hillbilly lunches packed with love and hard-earned pride? They once fed workers through long days when food came from home, not chains. When did we stop tasting the lives that built us? Cold biscuit sandwiches with molasses or fatback were the kind of lunch that got a man through a 12-hour day with nothing but grit and habit to lean on. The biscuits were always cold by the time the tin lunch pail opened, but that did not matter much. If there was molasses in the pantry, you spread it thick for sweetness. If there was only fatback, you tucked in a slice or two for salt and smoke. The biscuits themselves were usually baked from leftover dough at dawn, made tough enough to hold together through a morning in a jacket pocket. By noon, the edges had gone soft, and the smell of lard or syrup made the whole meal feel like home. These sandwiches were a bridge between the breakfast table and the next hard stretch of fieldwork, something made from what little you had but worth every bite. Each one carried a taste of someone's kitchen, and even in its plainness, it was love in its simplest form, wrapped in wax paper and patience. Cornbread and buttermilk in a jar was one of those hill country meals that told you everything about the people who made it. It was called a liquid lunch, though there was nothing fancy or store-bought about it. Crumbled cornbread went into a glass jar, and then cold buttermilk was poured over it until it soaked every crumb. On hot days, that jar came straight from a spring house or well bucket, cool enough to wake a man right up. You would shake it, maybe add a pinch of salt, and drink it thick like a meal. It was cheap, simple, and almost impossible to ruin, which is exactly why it became a favorite among farmers, mill hands, and anyone working under the sun. Some swore it was better than anything cooked fresh because it filled your belly without slowing your body down. It might not look like much, but that mixture of tangy milk and gritty bread was the South's version of endurance, comfort disguised as thrift. Apple stack cake slices were the mountain answer to store-bought sweets, and they lasted long enough to pack for lunch. Layers of molasses cake were stacked with cooked-down dried apples that had been mashed into a thick jam. You wrapped it tight in wax paper, and by noon the cake had softened and the apple filling had settled deep into every layer. These slices were never fancy, but they were the closest thing to dessert most folks saw during a workday. They carried the taste of fall orchards and wood stoves even when eaten under the summer sun. If you were lucky enough to get one in your pail, it was probably made by a grandmother who measured sweetness by memory, not spoons. The sugar was scarce, the flour stretched thin, but the effort behind it was rich. It was a small comfort after long hours in the field or at the mill, reminding everyone that even in lean times, there was room for something kind and homemade. Pinto bean patties turned humble leftovers into something hearty enough to carry through a day's labor. When supper's beans cooled on the stove, the next morning they would be mashed, mixed with cornmeal or flour, and fried into small cakes. Crisp on the outside, soft inside, they held together just enough to slide between slices of bread for an easy sandwich. Cold or warm, it did not matter. They tasted like thrift and care, proof that nothing in a hillbilly kitchen ever went to waste. You could spice them if you had the means, but even plain, they had a comfort all their own. Some said the flavor deepened overnight, as if the beans remembered the smoke from last night's fire. These patties were food for people who understood how to make plenty out of scraps, and they did it with pride. A jar of pickles on the side turned it into a full meal, simple but whole, just like the folks who made it. Cold-fried chicken thighs were not made for picnics or company. They were working man's food. The chicken was usually fried in lard the night before, seasoned simply with salt and pepper, then packed into tin pails while it was still warm. By the time lunchtime came, the crust had softened, the fat had settled, and the flavor had deepened into something only patience could make. Miners, loggers, and farm hands ate it straight from the bone, with biscuits or cornbread if they were lucky. It was greasy, hearty, and reliable, one of those meals that filled you up without fuss. Fried chicken was too precious to waste, so the thighs and legs went to work while the white meat stayed home for Sunday. Every bite carried the memory of the skillet's sizzle, the smell of home kitchens that kept the mountains fed even when the world forgot them. Sorghum syrup sandwiches were sugar for the poor and fuel for the strong. A thick smear of dark syrup between two biscuits or slices of white bread turned into instant energy for men working fields or hauling timber. Sorghum grew easy in southern soil, and the syrup mills were the heart of many small towns come harvest season. The sandwich itself was sticky and simple, sweetness caught between starch, just messy enough to make it real. It was the kind of food children would sneak before chores, and grown folks would pack for long days when they needed something to push them through. Sorghum was more than a sweetener. It was survival in a jar, and it stayed good for months. The taste was rich, earthy, and honest, a little bitter around the edges, just like life itself. Fried green tomato sandwiches were tart, crisp, and practical, born out of the need to use what the frost might ruin. Unripe tomatoes were sliced, dredged in cornmeal, and fried in bacon grease until golden. Layered between bread, they made a meal that traveled well and tasted like summer's last stand. Field hands loved them for the crunch, while homemakers loved that nothing from the garden went to waste. They were bright and sharp, the kind of food that woke your tongue after hours in the heat. Some folks added onions or a slice of cheese, but most ate them plain, still warm and oily in paper wrapping. It was a clever dish, built from what could not wait for tomorrow, carrying that same stubborn spirit that kept rural families going year after year. Potato cakes from leftover mash were the quiet heroes of mountain kitchens. You mixed yesterday's mashed potatoes with flour, salt, and maybe an egg if you had one, then fried them in lard until the edges turned crisp. They were soft inside and golden outside, wrapped in cloth to stay warm for the noontime break. Whether eaten with onions or just plain, they were the kind of food that filled the stomach and felt familiar. They started as supper leftovers but became a comfort in their own right, passed from hand to hand in lunch tins and brown paper. Nothing fancy, just good sense and good flavor. Every family had their way of making them, but they all shared the same goal, stretching a meal into tomorrow. Cornmeal mush squares were proof that mountain folks could turn the simplest ingredients into comfort. Cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt were cooked into a thick porridge at night, poured into a pan, and left to cool until firm. By morning, it's sliced clean, ready to be fried in bacon grease until crisp and golden on the outside. The inside stayed soft and creamy, making it a meal that worked hot or cold, plain or with a drizzle of syrup. It was food that didn't spoil fast, didn't cost much, and didn't need anything fancy to taste right. Even when cupboards were bare, there was always cornmeal to rely on. Its smell filled the kitchen like a promise, warm and earthy, steady as the sunrise. Every bite carried the comfort of routine and the pride of making something from almost nothing. In the mountains, that was enough to keep spirits strong. Hoecake cornbread was humble food with the weight of generations behind it. Mixed from cornmeal, salt, and water, it was poured thin into a skillet or, long ago, onto the flat of a hoe blade held over an open fire. It crisped at the edges and stayed tender in the middle, strong enough to hold beans, greens, or slices of salt pork. Each cake was both meal and utensil, eaten with calloused fingers and quiet gratitude. Hoecake cornbread carried the flavor of smoke and history, of families who worked from dawn to dark and gave thanks for even the smallest blessings. It was simple food, but never small in meaning, a recipe that traveled through generations, feeding hearts as much as stomachs. Poke salad and egg sandwiches were spring's first gift after a long winter's wait. When pokeweed shoots pushed through thawed soil, foragers gathered them young before bitterness set in. The leaves were boiled 3 times to wash away poison, then chopped, drained, and fried in bacon grease until dark and rich. Layered with slices of hard-boiled egg between bread, it became a hearty field lunch, fresh, filling, and full of life. The greens gave a wild tang that spoke of earth and rain, while the eggs brought comfort and weight. It was food born from patience and care, a reward for knowing the land well enough to take only what it offered. In the mountains, such meals weren't poor. They were proof that nature always paid back in flavor and grace. Vinegar pie slices were a forgotten miracle of thrift, bright, tangy, and sweet all at once. When lemons were scarce and fresh fruit out of reach, mountain cooks made do with vinegar, sugar, and eggs to create something that tasted every bit as fine. The filling baked into a glossy custard with a soft, buttery crust that held its shape even in the summer heat. It needed no refrigeration, no fancy ingredients, just patience and a steady hand. Wrapped in wax paper or newspaper, slices went into lunch pails beside coffee jars and biscuits. The first bite was sharp and surprising, but by the second, the vinegar's sting mellowed into a warm caramel-like sweetness. It was a pie that aged gracefully, growing richer over time, a small reward for those who worked hard and wasted nothing. It became a staple of mountain kitchens, a quiet symbol of resourceful living. What began as imitation lemon pie turned into something uniquely its own, humble yet elegant in its simplicity. Vinegar pie proved that flavor could come from imagination, not luxury, and that even in lean years, sweetness could still find its way to the table and make life a little softer. Ham hock and pinto bean pouches were lunches that filled the belly and lasted through the longest days. A single ham hock simmered with a pot of pintos could feed a family for days, the broth thickening into a smoky stew that needed nothing more. Whatever remained after supper was ladled into wax paper pouches or small jars for the next day's work. By noon, the beans had soaked up every ounce of flavor, turning creamy, hearty, and rich. Workers in sawmills, fields, and mines tore open their packets, scooped the contents out with a biscuit, and called it a meal. Salt from the ham kept it savory, the starch from the beans kept it filling, and the slow simmering made it comforting in a way only patience could create. It was food built to last, simple, nourishing, and deeply honest. No one left hungry, and nothing went to waste. Each bite carried the memory of home kitchens and the hum of pots left simmering on wood stoves. It wasn't elegant, but it was strong food, made for strong hands, feeding strength back into the very people who earned it every single day. Cold-fried apple hand pies were the portable sweetness that turned hard work into something worth savoring. Made from dried apples rehydrated with sugar, cinnamon, and a pinch of nutmeg, the filling was tucked inside thin circles of dough and fried until crisp. Once cooled, they were wrapped in brown paper, stacked neatly in tins, and packed for the next morning's work. By lunchtime, the pastry had softened around the filling, turning chewy and tender without losing its golden flavor. Each bite carried the taste of fall, the comfort of orchards, the scent of dried fruit, and the memory of wood smoke. Families made dozens during apple season, drying fruit on screens so none went to waste through winter. School children unwrapped them eagerly at recess, while farmers or miners found them waiting after hours of labor. Sweet but sturdy, they offered both joy and endurance. No frosting, no fuss, just the kind of dessert that worked as hard as the hands that made it. In every pie was gratitude, proof that simple fruit, a little sugar, and time could make something lasting. Sliced onion and tomato sandwiches with mayonnaise were summer's purest and most honest meal. Made with nothing but garden produce and store bread, they were a celebration of what grew close to home. Thick slices of ripe tomato, still warm from the vine, met rings of sharp onion and a generous swipe of mayonnaise on soft white bread. The result was messy, refreshing, and satisfying in the way only fresh things can be. It was food for the fields, for porches, for shade under trees on sweltering afternoons. No one needed money to make one, only a good harvest and a few minutes' rest. The sandwich dripped juice down your hands, tasting of sunshine, soil, and sweat. Its simplicity was its strength. It reminded people to be grateful for the ordinary, for what could be grown, picked, and shared. In a world where many meals relied on what could be stored or salted, this one was fleeting, tied to the season and the moment. It was both nourishment and nostalgia, the taste of summer itself pressed between two soft slices of bread. Souse meat or head cheese sandwiches were relics of an age before refrigeration, when nothing went to waste. Pig heads were boiled until tender, the meat stripped from the bone and mixed with vinegar, salt, pepper, and spice. The mixture was then pressed into a loaf and cooled until firm, forming a savory jelly that sliced cleanly. Packed between bread, it became a tangy, meaty sandwich that traveled well and kept for days without spoiling. It was food born of necessity but perfected through care, each loaf representing thrift, labor, and skill. Families made it during butchering season, stretching one hog across weeks of meals. The vinegar kept it safe, the seasoning made it shine, and the flavor told of a people who refused to waste what life gave. To some, it was an acquired taste. To others, it was comfort, rich and familiar. Cold, salty, and satisfying, it was a worker's protein long before canned meats existed. Souse meat carried both history and heart, a living memory of a time when survival and ingenuity shared the same kitchen table. Boiled egg and salt shaker combos were a miner's quick meal when time and daylight were short. At the start of each week, men would boil a dozen eggs, cool them overnight, and carry 2 or 3 in their lunch pails each morning. Alongside went a tiny salt shaker or a twist of salt wrapped in wax paper, ready to sprinkle with one hand. When the whistle blew, they cracked the shell, salted the egg, and ate it standing where they worked. No fork, no napkin, no delay. It was the very picture of practicality, a meal built for endurance, not comfort. Eggs were cheap, clean, and full of energy, which made them a working man's perfect food. Some paired them with coffee or a leftover biscuit, others with nothing at all. Yet even this simple fare carried dignity, the kind that came from effort, not indulgence. Those eggs fueled miners, mill hands, and farmers through heat, dust, and strain. Every bite was a quiet act of persistence, the kind of steady habit that turned hunger into strength. It wasn't fancy, but it worked, and in those long, weary hours underground or in the field, that was more than enough to keep a man going. Leftover biscuit and gravy cakes were born from a kitchen that refused to waste even a spoonful. When the morning sausage gravy thickened in the skillet and yesterday's biscuits went stale, someone clever mixed them together. The crumbs soaked in the drippings, turning soft and savory before being shaped into patties and fried crisp. What came out was something new, a hearty griddle cake, golden on the outside, creamy within. Eaten hot, they were a breakfast miracle. Eaten cold at noon, they were comfort on the go. Wrapped in wax paper, they stayed tender, tasting of salt, smoke, and satisfaction. A drizzle of sorghum or a spoon of jam could make them sweet, but most folks ate them plain, proud of their frugality. Every bite was a reminder that good food didn't need new ingredients, only imagination. Families who stretched every meal found a small victory in these cakes, proof that thrift could still be delicious. The scent of them frying filled the house with warmth and gratitude, carrying yesterday's effort straight into today's workday hunger. Potted meat and cracker stackers were the quiet heroes of pantry survival. A small tin of potted meat, salty, smooth, and heavily seasoned, was the kind of staple that didn't spoil and never complained. Paired with plain soda crackers, it became a full meal in minutes, eaten on break room benches or the back of trucks. Some spread it thick like sandwich filling. Others scooped it straight from the can. It wasn't fancy, but it filled the belly and steadied the hands for another long day. Factory workers, students, and traveling salesmen all trusted it when fresh food was out of reach. A slice of onion, a dab of mustard, or a splash of hot sauce could turn it almost gourmet. Cheap, convenient, and long-lasting potted meat was a small insurance policy against hunger. It tasted of salt, smoke, and persistence, the flavor of getting by when times were lean. Those little cans represented ingenuity as much as necessity, proving that even the simplest food could stand as a symbol of endurance. Cold-fried catfish fillets were Friday's triumph and Saturday's carryover reward. In river towns, families rose early to catch catfish at dawn, cleaning and frying them in cornmeal and lard before the day's heat set in. The best pieces were eaten hot, but a few were saved for later, wrapped in paper and tucked away. By the next day, the fish had firmed up, its flavor richer and smoky from the oil. Cold, it was still perfect, dense, seasoned, and satisfying without a single reheat. Workers packed it in tins, sometimes with sliced onion or a jar of pickles for sharpness. It was food that spoke of place and patience, of hands that knew the rhythm of rivers. No waste, no luxury, just honest nourishment pulled from water and grit. Every bite carried the taste of southern creeks, the scent of frying oil, and the sound of morning reels spinning. It was simplicity perfected, made by those who trusted skill and hard work over wealth. Cold or hot, fried catfish stayed the same, steady, filling, and rooted in the life it came from. Sweet potato biscuit sandwiches were the kind of lunch that reminded folks that thrift could taste like tenderness. The biscuits were soft and golden, their orange hue a promise of warmth even on the coldest mornings. Made with mashed sweet potatoes, flour, lard, and a touch of sorghum or molasses, they stayed moist long after they cooled. Wrapped in wax paper and carried in lunch pails or cloth sacks, they held together through fields, mills, and rail yards. Some were filled with ham or salt pork, others with apple butter or honey if luck allowed. That balance of sweet and salty made each bite feel like a small comfort earned by honest labor. Sweet potatoes were a farmer's blessing, cheap, nourishing, and long-lasting. They grew in poor soil, stored through winter, and stretched across every meal from breakfast to supper. But in biscuit form, they became something more, a taste of home that could travel anywhere. Even eaten cold, they carried the warmth of the kitchen, the memory of hands that mixed, kneaded, and baked with care. Each bite was nourishment for body and spirit, proof that a little sweetness and hard work could turn humble ingredients into something unforgettable. Homemade Bologna and chow-chow sandwiches were the Hill Country's proud reply to city deli fare. The Bologna, ground from pork trimmings and spiced with pepper, garlic, and smoke, was sliced thick and fried until its edges curled and browned. Between two slices of white or cornbread, it met a spoonful of bright chow-chow relish, sharp with vinegar, sweet with cabbage, onions, and green tomatoes. The mix was both hearty and lively, turning simple ingredients into a sandwich that tasted far richer than it cost. Mill workers, field hands, and school children carried them alike, wrapped tight in paper for long days ahead. Chow-chow was a pantry jewel made each autumn from the vegetables left behind after harvest. Nothing was wasted, and every jar told of careful hands and patient hearts. When that tangy relish met hot Bologna, it sparked something cheerful, a reminder that home-cooked food could rival anything fancy or store-bought. The flavor was sharp, smoky, and proud, standing for a way of life that prized making do and making well. It was the taste of resourcefulness, sealed in a jar and shared across generations. Field pea and ham salad was more than a side dish. It was a whole meal dressed in simplicity. Made from boiled field peas mixed with diced ham, onions, and a bright splash of vinegar, it was spooned into glass jars to last the week. The salad was eaten cold, often with cornbread, biscuits, or crackers, and it kept workers full through long afternoons. The vinegar acted like a preservative, keeping it fresh even without ice, perfect for tin pails and field lunches. Each jar told the story of frugality turned to comfort. Field peas grew where little else would, fixing nitrogen in the soil and feeding families at the same time. When mixed with ham scraps or drippings, they became both practical and indulgent in their own quiet way. It was peasant food that carried pride, a dish built from endurance and earth. Families relied on it through planting, harvest, and lean months between. Every spoonful tasted of patience, resilience, and gratitude for what the land gave back. In its humble way, it fed both hunger and hope, proving that survival could still be seasoned with grace. Corn fritters with maple or sorghum drizzle were the kind of lunch that blurred the line between meal and treat. Fresh corn was grated or sliced straight from the cob, mixed with flour, egg, salt, and just enough milk to hold together. Each spoonful dropped into hot grease puffed into golden rounds, crisp on the edges and soft inside. Once fried, they were eaten right from the skillet or wrapped in paper for later, still sweet and fragrant. Coal miners, mill hands, and field workers prized them for their flavor and sturdiness. They kept well, filled the belly, and reminded folks of summer even in the dead of winter. If there was syrup, maple up north, sorghum down south, a drizzle turned them into something close to joy. Some paired them with beans or greens, others just coffee in a tin cup. The smell of frying corn was enough to lift spirits, a melody of popping grease and laughter. In every fritter lived the taste of home, of fields and patience, of hands that turned hunger into invention. It was a meal, a memory, and a small miracle all at once, showing that sweetness could survive even the hardest days. Cabbage and bacon slaw sandwiches were a working man's quick fix straight from the garden and skillet. When cabbage was plentiful and nothing from a hog was wasted, this meal came together with ease. Fresh cabbage was chopped fine, tossed in a pan of hot bacon grease, seasoned with salt, pepper, and sometimes a dash of vinegar or sugar for balance. Once cooled, it was spooned onto bread or leftover biscuits, packed tight for lunch. The mix stayed crisp yet savory, the smoky fat deepening as the hours passed. By noon, it had turned into something richer than it seemed, a sandwich both sharp and soothing. It was cheap, quick, and loaded with flavor, the kind that cut through weariness after long shifts. Every bite carried the proof that good food didn't depend on plenty, only on care. In homes where gardens met smokehouses, this was daily genius, born from habit and hunger. The slaw sandwich stood as a quiet anthem of thrift, the taste of comfort made from what was at hand. Even cold, it satisfied, whispering of early mornings, frying bacon, and the scent of cabbage fresh from the dirt. Leftover grit cakes were another trick from kitchens that never believed in waste. When breakfast grits cooled and hardened overnight, they were sliced into tidy slabs and dropped into a pan of bacon drippings until each side turned golden brown and crisp. What came out looked plain, but carried the soul of comfort, a poor man's polenta that filled the stomach and lifted the heart. Some ate them drizzled with syrup, others topped them with salt pork, or dipped them in molasses if luck allowed. They were easy to pack, easy to eat, and steady enough to power a long day in the field or mill. Each bite reminded folks that resourcefulness was its own kind of wealth. No one with grit cakes went hungry. They were the morning's promise made real again. In that humble frying pan, yesterday's meal became tomorrow's strength. The smell alone spoke of care, of families that found pride in making enough from little. It was food that didn't ask for praise, only gratitude, a quiet lesson in how to live with grace, grit, and a cast-iron skillet. Peanut butter and banana biscuits were the sweet salvation of lean years, tasting like dessert when money was tight. Ripe bananas were mashed smooth and spread over thick peanut butter, then sandwiched inside soft, flaky biscuits instead of bread. It was sweet, hearty, and rich, without a pinch of sugar added. The mix stuck to your ribs and filled your spirit, keeping both kids and field hands steady through long days. Bananas were a treasure when they appeared, often bruised and discounted, but none ever went to waste. Combined with peanut butter, a cheap protein that never spoiled, they became a working lunch with soul. The taste was warm and familiar, blending comfort and cleverness in every bite. School children unwrapped them with smiles, and grown folks took them to fields or mills, knowing it would last till dusk. It was mountain ingenuity wrapped in wax paper, proof that the simplest pairings could turn survival into satisfaction. In the heart of hardship, that biscuit sandwich shone as quiet joy, proof that love, thrift, and a little sweetness could still fill the table and the heart alike. Vinegar-cured cucumber slices and salt pork were the mountain version of lunch without cooking. Sliced cucumbers were soaked in vinegar, salt, and sugar until they turned bright, crisp, and bracingly sour. They were eaten cold straight from the jar, often beside small chunks of fried or baked salt pork whose fat balanced the sharpness perfectly. The two together made a working man's ideal meal. One jar for meat, one for pickles, tucked neatly in the lunch pail. The vinegar bite cut through the heaviness of the pork, leaving a clean taste that made you want another bite. For miners, farmers, and sawmill hands, this pairing was proof that practicality could still have pleasure. Nothing spoiled fast, nothing needed heating, and nothing went to waste. Even on the hottest days, that chill tang and salty chew could keep a man steady through the afternoon. It wasn't fancy fare, but it was clever and satisfying. built from what the land and pantry gave without complaint. In every mouthful was balance, thrift, and the quiet pride of those who knew how to make something complete from almost nothing at all. Cold meatloaf slice sandwiches were Sunday's pride turned Monday's practicality. Once baked, the meatloaf was sliced thick, cooled, and pressed between bread with a smear of ketchup or relish. Cold, it lost none of its comfort. If anything, the flavor deepened overnight. Wrapped in wax paper, it carried the scent of home even at a noisy job site. For families who stretched meals across the week, a single loaf could mean days of sustenance. Every bite was seasoned with thrift, care, and gratitude. Ground beef, breadcrumbs, onions, and egg formed the heart of this dish, but what held it together was intention, feeding many with little. It was the kind of food that reminded you to be content, even in repetition. Monday's sandwich might taste like yesterday's dinner, but it meant stability, the rarest luxury in lean times. Whether eaten cold from a tin or at the edge of a kitchen counter, it brought the same comfort. A reminder that resourcefulness could be as filling as plenty, and that good food didn't need to be new to feel like love. Fried Bologna and egg on white bread was the classic taste of mill towns and working shifts that never seemed to end. Bologna, cheap and salty, was sliced and fried until its edges curled like little cups, sizzling in a skillet still warm from the morning coffee. An egg followed, fried in the same grease, yolk soft enough to run just a bit, and together they met between two slices of plain white bread. The sandwich was hot, messy, and deeply satisfying. It could be eaten in 2 minutes before the whistle blew, or packed away and still taste good hours later. For many, the smell of frying bologna was the sound of morning itself, cutting through factory clatter and early fog. It was working food, quick, hearty, and honest, made for people who didn't have time to waste but still wanted something that felt whole. Even cold by lunchtime, it carried that same smoky bite and sense of endurance. It wasn't elegant, but it was loyal, like the hands that made it every dawn. It fed the hunger that came from effort, not luxury, and left behind the comfort of something earned. Baked corn pudding brought a gentle sweetness to the lunch line, a golden casserole where fresh or canned corn mingled with eggs, milk, and a touch of sugar. When the pans emerged from the oven, the top was lightly browned while the inside stayed soft and custardy, a perfect balance of savory and sweet. Children loved the way the kernels popped against the creamy base, offering a satisfying texture with every bite. The smell of warm corn and butter greeted students as they shuffled their trays forward, promising comfort before the first spoonful. Teachers praised it as a vegetable dish, while kids simply enjoyed it as an unexpected treat that felt almost like dessert. It paired well with roasted meats or stood alone as a hearty side that filled empty stomachs without fuss. Baked corn pudding captured the spirit of the 1960s cafeteria. Simple, nourishing, and quietly indulgent, a dish that made an ordinary school day taste like a Sunday dinner. Fish finger sandwiches started off as being wonderful party food and a pretty reasonable meal to go for at diners, but they ended up being something that was also a dish people wanted more of in their daily routines. Some tartar sauce, a fried fish, and 2 slices of bread have never done anyone wrong. It's something you can rely on, and it's a perfect intersection between convenient, unfamiliar, and healthy. Lots of people that were trying to take care of their diet, cut out a bit of their usual sources of protein, and just eat a bit more organic would opt for sandwiches like this. I think if you ever really want to make something pop off in America, you just put it in a sandwich, because that at least guarantees that everyone will try it, you know? Fish finger sandwiches are sometimes a recipe that people say we got from European culture, but it's something I think fishermen have been living off of forever. So not only is this a dish you would see in a tech labyrinth, otherwise known as offices, you would also just see fishermen and dock workers eating these after a hard day's work. It would put some pep in your step, and that's never really something people can have too much of. I think that now sandwiches have become more advanced since accessibility has only gone up with the amount of frozen foods we have now, so these probably have taken a bit of a back seat. As far as work lunches go, I can't lie. I think you can do better than cold potato and sausage salad. It's not really the worst thing to get in the world, but it's not something I want for my dear viewers. Just picture it yourself. You're at work, there's already an unnecessary scheduled HR meeting, someone's missing their shift, and your boss wants you to cover, and on top of all that, you open up your lunch only to find a perfectly below room temperature salad of, let's see, potatoes and sausages. I wouldn't blame you if you just skipped that entirely, went downstairs and got yourself a granola bar. Really. At least that fuels you, you know? Seriously though, this dish was trying to be really healthy, but one of the biggest things about following a healthy diet is how sustainable it is. Unfortunately for everyone, flavor is a big part of that, because it's the same with your work, you know? You like what you do. You feel like you don't work a day in your life. You eat what you like. You don't feel like you're dieting either. Cold pork pie was weird. It was supposed to be this British savory pastry that was probably the only dish best served cold after revenge, but I think it fell short on a lot of fronts. First, let's start with what constitutes a cold pork pie. This frigidly cold piece of British culture comes fully equipped with American favorites like lard, chopped or ground pork, nutmeg, mace, and lots of other stuffings. Plus, you know how people start experimenting with food and adding their own twists and turns wherever they can, no matter what. Who really sticks to tradition when you have like 5 different kinds of cheese to try? Anyway, while all of that sounds pretty good, fun, and a perfect environment for some serious brainstorming with what you can do with a pork pie, it was the savory jelly and cold aspect of it that kind of didn't stick too well. After the baking, you were supposed to pour a savory jelly made out of pork stock into the pie through a pretty tiny hole in the crust. Once the jelly would set and cool, it would enrich the flavor of the pie even more and help to preserve the meat as well. Pork pies were, for this reason, always served cold. However, America is a place that's really used to having their pork pies hot. And as you can probably tell, that's why you don't see bakeries, homes, or offices having cold pork pie days anymore. Tomato soup with soda cracker crumble was the poor man's lunch that somehow managed to feel warm, filling, and familiar without draining your pantry. You heated up canned tomato soup on the stove, crushed soda crackers over the top, maybe added a little pepper, and lunch was done in under 10 minutes. It was cozy, simple, and showed up in almost every household because it used staples that were always around. Kids loved smashing the crackers into the bowl. Parents loved how it stretched one can of soup into something that could actually fill a belly. This was the lunch for snow days, sick days, or those afternoons when the fridge was bare and dinner still felt far away. The recipe popped up in every thrift store cookbook, always listed under quick meals or lunches for a crowd. Some families added milk or a pat of butter to make it richer, but most kept it plain and fast. It sounds basic now, but for families scraping by in the 1960s or 1970s, this little soup was a warm reminder that simple food could still get the job done. Turkey tetrazzini squares offered a clever twist on a post-holiday classic, transforming leftover turkey and noodles into neat, sliceable portions. Creamy mushroom sauce-coated strands of spaghetti and chunks of turkey, all baked until the top formed a delicate golden crust. Once cooled slightly, the pan was cut into perfect squares that held together just long enough to reach a tray. The rich aroma of garlic and cheese drifted through the lunchroom, giving every student hope that today's meal would taste like something from home. Children loved the way each bite combined tender turkey, creamy sauce, and chewy pasta in one satisfying mouthful. It was a dish that made leftovers feel like a celebration, proving that creativity and thrift could produce something special. Turkey tetrazzini squares are a delicious memory of a time when nothing was wasted, and every holiday bird found a second life in the school cafeteria. To be honest, same deal with corned beef and cabbage wraps. The thing with sandwiches is that, as good as they were, most people really were trying to get onto that health parade that was taking over. It wasn't just a trend or a niche movement you'd only find in states that voted blue. It was something even the anti-vaxxers were getting behind. And if you can get those people to think about their health, you know we're either at rock bottom or approaching it. Corned beef and cabbage wraps were supposed to be familiar ground, while also being healthy enough that you could eat them every day. Plus, lots of people had grown pretty accustomed to eating cabbage thanks to victory gardens, which were just makeshift gardens you would have in your backyard during the Depression and grow crops out of. These were actually really good too, and with canned corned beef becoming a widespread item in most stores, it was only easier to make at home. Even someone who couldn't cook could just make and assemble this on their own. Homemade fish sticks were a really easy dish to make at home. They were really popular in blue-collar households and rural farmsteads that either couldn't afford the back and forth to big cities to get hauls of frozen food, or just ones who preferred to make their own stuff. Even if the transport wasn't an issue, frozen food would outright just be more expensive than people could accept sometimes, especially things like Gorton's or Van de Kamp's. Families didn't really just write the idea off entirely though, because the concept of fish sticks being frozen for later use is pretty good. They adapted it into a homemade recipe instead, and this was especially true for all the towns near coastal areas like in the Great Lakes. They had access to all kinds of fresh local fish. But what about the people who had lived their whole lives in landlocked areas with no sight of water? Well, they used canned or frozen fish, and they used it more sparingly than others, but they would still resort to making their own fish sticks at home. Buying entire fillets and cutting them up was a lot more cost-effective than buying the prepackaged thing. Also, if you were a Catholic and meatless Fridays were really a thing back in your home, this was a great alternative. You would find this recipe scribbled on index cards, stuck in old cookbooks, or just passed along by word of mouth. It might sound like an oddball now, but back then, Spam and pickles were a lunchroom classic that got families through tight days. Egg salad with sweet pickle relish was the batch-made lunch that carried families through hot summers, last-minute picnics, and quick work breaks. You boiled up some eggs, peeled them, chopped them, mixed in mayo, sweet pickle relish, a little salt and pepper, and scooped the whole thing onto soft sandwich bread or rolls. It was creamy, tangy, and came together fast, especially if the eggs were boiled ahead of time. Old cookbooks loved this one because it was practical, frugal, and ready in under 10 minutes if you planned right. It filled up hungry bellies when grocery money was tight, and kids happily took it to school tucked in wax paper wraps. Some folks dressed it up with celery or paprika, but the sweet pickle relish was the real shortcut, adding just enough kick to brighten up plain eggs and mayo. You would find this recipe in faded lunchbox guides, community cookbooks, or scribbled on note cards in kitchen drawers. It might not win awards today, but back then, it was one of those quick, comforting lunches that kept families fed when every dollar counted. Now, as for egg and breadcrumb patties, these were really nice protein-packed meals that were also a wonderful way to make sure your family and household wasn't wasting any kind of bread. They were particularly popular in all kinds of farming families, and they were a pillar of Great Depression-era cooking. Stretching ingredients was really essential in these times, and it was pretty much how people lived for ages. This dish was a meat substitute that was great for coal mining towns and towns where industrial, labor-intensive jobs were more common. This is because it was such a good source of protein and energy while also filling you up. It made those really long work hours in the sun or in a mine a bit easier to get through, though let's be real, nothing was helping too much with that. The seasonings were very bare minimum though. Salt, pepper, onions, mustard, garlic were your typical picks. I mean, I know that sounds like a lot, but people would just pick different combinations of these and see what worked best for their pasties. The crunch and crisp on that first bite from the breadcrumbs though, that was a work of art. Peanut butter and honey sandwiches delivered pure, sticky joy that somehow satisfied federal nutrition guidelines while still feeling like a treat. Thick slices of white bread were spread edge to edge with creamy peanut butter, then drizzled with golden honey that soaked slowly into the crumb. When pressed together, the sandwich oozed sweetness with every bite, leaving fingers gleaming and napkins useless. Paired with a small carton of milk and a crisp apple, it offered both protein and energy for the playground ahead. Children loved the chewy contrast of salty peanut butter and smooth honey, a flavor combination that made even dull afternoons feel a little brighter. Lunchroom chatter often paused for the satisfying pull of honey between bites, a small moment of collective delight. Simple, inexpensive, and universally adored, this sandwich remains a memory of childhood that no packaged snack has ever replaced. So we're not done with the toasts just yet. Pork and beans on buttered toast was arguably the lifeblood of 1960s frugal eating. It was a simple and cheap meal that was very popular even from the 1940s, and while baked beans on toast was something that people always associated with New England and immigrant cuisine, baked beans on toast actually became something that Americans took very fondly to. It was thanks to the act of mixing canned pork and beans in there, and these beans would already be seasoned and sweetened. Thank you, Campbell's. This dish was something you would see in mining communities really often. You would also see them in mill towns. You didn't need any sort of prep work for this dish whatsoever. All you had to do was just pop open the can and heat it up. You could make a sandwich out of it too, or you could have it as a side to some stew and dip it in. People ate very different and interesting things back then, not just to keep everything according to budget, but also so that things would just taste better, be healthier, you know? People really used to treat their food like fuel back in the day. Speaking of meaty sandwiches, the Turkey Club sandwich was another fan favorite. Now, this one was known for its 3 layers of bread, which made it stand out from the rest of the sandwiches on the table. The club sandwich has its roots in American culinary history, with some sources suggesting it was first served in private social clubs in the late 19th century. By the time Grandma was making them, it had already become the talk of the town. Gram often made this one the day after Thanksgiving when there was no shortage of leftover roast turkey in the refrigerator. The key ingredient in this sandwich was crispy bacon, which Gram added to make it kid-friendly and 10 times more delicious. Grandma's Turkey Club sandwich was often cut in quarters or halves, which made it easier to eat, and this was the first time sandwiches were cut diagonally. And remember the toothpicks Gram used to hold it together with colorful cellophane frills? Brings back memories, doesn't it? So, like I was just telling you, Spam used to be the next big thing, and for good reason too. We had things like Spam and cheese roll-ups. A typical 70s office lunch would look like slices of Spam that had been rolled up with mustard and cheese. Now, these could either be grilled to enhance the smokiness of the Spam and make it contrast nicer with the pineapple, or you could bake it so that the cheese would melt and the mustard would mix in with it better for an overall more well-rounded flavor. All things considered, this was on the right track. It was quick, it was tasty, it was healthy, and it was also what people needed during a time where re-entering the workforce was really hard and put a lot of people out of their usual routines. The thing is, America is known for fickle trends. We'll like something one day, swear by it the next, and forget it halfway into the night. Spam and cheese roll-ups were good, but they took a sideline and started being party food more than a work lunch. Carrot and raisin salad sandwiches were the prime example of how to make something healthy not taste like death. They were the best thing to have whenever you would visit the countryside, and even people in urban areas started to adopt this recipe. That's because when you see a genuinely good deal, you just don't let it go. And there's rarely a deal as good as this one. Raisins were shelf-stable, sweet, naturally full of sugar, and they could last for weeks if kept properly. Just a bit of Miracle Whip would do wonders for the dish, too. Carrots, on the other hand, were extremely cheap, reasonable to buy in bulk, and for most people in the countryside, a standard crop that they were already growing. They only required some grating and mixing, and it basically was the perfect summer dish because of how refreshing it was. I'm sure the experience of melting in the summer and being forced to deal with the fact that you're an adult human is one we all dread. In times like that, and since it's summer, it's always like that, you want to really spend as little time in the kitchen as possible. A dish like this works even better because you have to spend all of 15 minutes to get it done, and in return, you get a whole haul of goodies. Vitamin A, natural sugar content, fiber, and my mom used to tell me carrots helped improve your memory. So if you're looking to try a new kind of salad, this 60s sensation is probably for you. Peanut butter and banana roll-ups are way better than you might think. Despite the seemingly bad impression they make in your head, these are the perfect harmony of savory peanut butter and sweet, sweet banana. Also, it works both ways. If you don't like the texture of bananas because they're very mushy, then you'll enjoy this because more peanut butter actually makes it resemble a custard. If you're already a fan, then you'll find that the sweet richness only makes this much better. So most of the time in the 60s, people used to use flattened tortilla bread for this. Now, some people like to toast theirs, but that kind of goes against the vibe of the dessert in my opinion. How do you feel about it? Also, people were very often using this as a breakfast. It worked too. As far as breakfasts go, this is easily the most ideal one because it gives you enough energy to last through an entire day. Some people preferred to have this in smoothie form though, but that wasn't nearly as effective as making a sandwich. Think about it. What do you get with maybe 2 sandwiches using the same amount you did for the milkshake? Exactly. And you get milk on the side? Who's ever complained about that? Besides, weird people that don't like milk. Hot dog and cheese roll-ups were the lazy day lunch every kid begged for, and every parent threw together when the cupboards looked bare. You flattened a slice of white bread, laid down a piece of cheese, rolled in a hot dog, and either microwaved it or crisped it up in a pan. It was fast, cheesy, and exactly what you needed when there were hungry mouths and barely any groceries. Some folks sliced them into little bites for parties or potlucks, but most families just ate them whole with a squirt of mustard or ketchup on the side. These roll-ups showed up in almost every old-school cookbook under quick meals or lunches for kids because they made 1 pack of hot dogs stretch a long way. You could make a whole tray of them in minutes, which is why this quirky little lunch became a go-to when time and money were both running low. It was not fancy, but it filled you up, and that is what counted. Fish Stick Fridays were a weekly ritual, a nod to the no meat on Friday tradition that gave school kitchens a chance to break out the frozen boxes. Golden fish sticks lined up neatly on metal trays, their breadcrumb crusts crisp from the industrial ovens while the insides steamed softly. Tartar sauce cups were passed along the counter, and a squeeze of lemon was a rare treat when the budget allowed. The smell of baked fish mingled with the scent of fresh rolls and cartons of milk, a combination that only children of that era can truly appreciate. Some kids swapped their sticks for extra dessert, while others built towers of fish and bread on their plates, daring friends to take a bite. It was a meal that taught patience because those fish sticks stayed hot long after you sat down. The memory of that crunchy first bite remains sharp, a taste of childhood Fridays when the weekend was just a bell away. So, bar none, the best breakfast to start your day with was always cream chipped beef on toast. It wasn't really the most visually impressive or appealing dish, but it had a certain kind of coziness to it. Maybe it's the kind of vibe you cultivate after being a household breakfast item for years. Maybe they just liked the simplicity. All you had to do was get some toast, a can of chipped beef, and you were pretty much done. Maybe they wanted to be like their brave army because this was also one of the most widespread military breakfasts. It could be the texture, or it could be that it's an easy source of protein early in the morning. But given how all of these are likely, that really tells you just how popular of a breakfast this ended up becoming. Not only that, it was one of the most economical ways to get some beef in your diet. That was just a cut of meat that was too hard to afford regularly for most working-class families. Around the later half of the 20th century, there was this big public paranoia that had spread concerning health and the after effects of the way Americans had been eating. Thanks to all that rage, we got dishes like vegetable aspic cups. See, lots of Americans were coming home to an angry mom, a worried wife, or a dad who just kept saying he wouldn't pay for the doctor's fees when your eating habits would eventually circle back around to bite you. It kind of did set fear into people's hearts, especially since the arguments were so convincing. Who could deny that they were eating Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's like addicts back then, or even now? That's why there was this newfound room for fusion food or experimental recipes like vegetable aspic cups. Before, you could tell somebody about vegetables that were set in these tomato-flavored gelatins, and they'd just laugh at you. A chilled salad on top of that? But thanks to how easy convenience food culture had made things, with how you could just buy gelatin and frozen veggies whenever you needed, This was actually a really solid and healthy work lunch option. Creamed corn and bacon on toast was one of the best meals to ever make for yourself. I know we've had a fair amount of toast-based dishes, but there really were so many things you could do. The format is timeless. Now, spreading bacon bits on toast isn't exactly anything we would call revolutionary, but the idea of adding creamed corn onto it as well? Now we're talking. Corn has always had an extremely warm place in most people's hearts because it's just a crop that's always there for you. It's really easy to grow, and almost every farming household or town would have an ample supply of corn. They'd dedicate a chunk of their land to it if they could, because it wasn't just good, nutritious, and free food, it was also good for trading. But you can't do any of that without a good breakfast, and that's also where corn is a great friend to have. Creamed corn with bacon on toast was also something people made sandwiches out of by adding olives, jalapenos, and other toppings to it to make it more exciting and filling. Usually, kids wouldn't really settle for just creamed corn on toast, so it was a lot easier to make a sandwich out of it for them. Tuna Jell-O. Salad is a striking example of mid-20th century American culinary creativity, combining seemingly incongruous ingredients like canned tuna and lime-flavored gelatin. This dish first emerged in the 1950s, a time when gelatin salads were all the rage. The process involves dissolving lime Jell-O in hot water and mixing it with canned tuna, finely chopped celery, pimento, and hard-boiled eggs, then letting it set until firm. Served on a bed of lettuce and often garnished with dollops of mayonnaise or whipped cream, this salad blends savory and sweet in a mold that is as eye-catching as it is unique. Often featured as the centerpiece at luncheons or as a dinner entree, its unique combination of ingredients and textures made it a memorable, if somewhat unusual, dish. Ploughman's lunch was this really traditional British cold meal, and I guess you'll find a lot of these on the list. The basic combo here was basically just bread, some pickles, chutneys, apples, and cheese. You'd also get chutneys, which I'm not sure what that's worth. The British never really made good ones anyway. Hey, I'm only kidding. It's quintessentially a European breakfast though, and over there it's even considered rustic. But over here, just like the previous item, this was considered pretty controversial. Now, most of the setup here was something any pure-blooded American could work with. You have your farmhouse loaves, some sourdough if that's not your type, or even multigrain bread. We've eaten Subway on hungrier days with those same options, right? It was just the cold meat part that wouldn't vibe well with a lot of people. I mean, really though, what do you expect? This is the land of cookouts with grills, deep-fried chicken fillets, and melted gooey cheese on just about everything. Cold just doesn't fit anywhere in that picture. Ham and scalloped potatoes delivered a creamy, savory combination that tasted like a holiday dinner served at midday. Thinly sliced potatoes were layered with diced ham and onions, then covered in a rich milk sauce before baking until bubbly and golden on top. The scent of smoky ham and buttery potatoes spread through the school corridors, drawing students forward with eager anticipation. Each forkful blended tender potatoes and salty ham with just enough sauce to coat every bite. Lunch ladies served generous squares that stayed warm and satisfying, a perfect answer to chilly days. Children savored the way the flavors melded, making it one of the most requested meals on the monthly menu. Ham and scalloped potatoes showed how school kitchens turned simple ingredients into comfort food that could rival any family recipe, leaving a memory of creamy richness that endures in the minds of those who tasted it. Cucumber and onion sandwiches were a really simple and refreshing butter, mayonnaise, different kinds of spices, and sometimes bits of bacon and ham on top of cucumbers. See, now I don't know if you guys will agree with me, but cucumbers really have a good place in the world of sandwiches and burgers. They're one of the most light toppings you can add, they're abundant, they're good for you, that crunchy bite is immaculate, and they work well with most kinds of sauces. It's a really straightforward dish that can work with almost anything you happen to have on hand. And on a hot summer day, this was the perfect meal to eat for your work lunch. It was served as an interlude between the usual fried, oily, and greasy food most Americans were used to anyway. Onions were something that everyone always had, and this could work with fresh or stale bread. They were beloved mostly for their detoxifying effects and how refreshing a cucumber can be. Textile workers and coal miners in particular loved these because it would take the edge off. Cabbage and bacon fry-up was something people adored for its simplicity and its affordability. It was a hearty meal you would frequently see on dinner tables throughout the 1960s if you weren't already tired of seeing it everywhere in cookbooks. It was very common to see this in Appalachia and the South, because cabbage was especially cheap there. Bacon was something the entire nation had a deep-found appreciation for, but the South was always one step ahead in all things savory. The dish was supposed to be a main course meal with a side. This would usually be cornbread or potatoes, but if you were working with lower quantities, then this dish could also do great as a side dish. Cabbage was one of the most affordable vegetables on the entire market, and it was not seasonal. Back then, refrigeration had not become a countrywide phenomena that everyone could rely on 24/7 like we do. We have our fridges on all the time, you know? And cabbage was one of those kinds of vegetables that could last for weeks and weeks without any kind of refrigeration. It was really quick and easy, it was flexible, and you could even try all kinds of different spices and toppings like ranch dressing to make it even better. If you've ever tasted one of these simple miracles, tell us your favorite in the comments, tap that like button, and subscribe so you never miss another bite of history.